Please tell me, how did you meet this beautiful woman sitting next to you?
Look, this is the fate of war. Yes. I was redeployed as a detachment commander. Then I had one encounter where I was wounded. I left the battlefield. Luckily, the others, because we were not so well organized, our commander had not done his job properly, abandoned a big unit, which should not have been a big unit. So I left the battlefield with my gun, only at the gathering point where we were meeting to be reminded by my friend that I had to throw away the gun. I said, I can't throw it away. He says, can you look at your piston cover of the gun? I looked at it. It had been peeled off by a bullet. So the gun was useless. He says, it's not a gun anymore. So anyway, I managed to go back to Mozambique unarmed, under guard, and lost those who were guarding me. Some of them lost their lives guarding me, which is a measure of the sacrifice which we had made for each other. So I later recovered, and I then went to one of our refugee camps, and that's the first time I saw her, but she was just part of these refugees who had escaped from a massacre at a camp called Nyadzonya, where in 1976. I had been to that camp before I trained, and she had arrived there, and a few days into her arrival, the Rhodesians attacked this refugee camp. It was a refugee camp, and a lot of young people died. They couldn't cross the river, and they were mowed down by an enemy who had gone in pretending to be under the camouflage of being the Mozambican army, because it was a refugee camp. So I met her at a relocation camp called Doroi. I didn't meet her, I saw her. Yes, then it was terrible. There's a British film about that place. I was the camp commander, and there was biological warfare with people, tropical ulcers, peeling off their muscles, from chemical and biological warfare. And I was burying probably 120 people a day, just from neglect and biological warfare. I was the commander. Then I left afterwards back to the main camp where we're doing the training, and she then ended up also at that training camp. We trained and we ran a political school, and she ended up being again among those who were political cadres, trained for political. She had been deployed at the front in year 10, but now those with experience were now being taught another level of political consciousness. So she was there. That's when I started talking to her, and I realized she was a smart girl, but I was the principal of that, deputy principal of that school. Then later, the president of the republic now, he had gone to war earlier, trained in Egypt and later in China, came back home when the army was still very small. Probably could count them on both fingers of the feet and the hands. The army was still very small. So he got deployed, was captured, and spent 10 years in prison. And he escaped the news because they couldn't find his birth certificate. So he was not the hanging age because the birth certificate was not available. There was no proof that he was 23, which was supposed to be the hanging age. So he escaped the news. All his other friends who had birth certificate were, of course, they were hanged. So because of the fight, the army had grown big. It forced the British to negotiations, the army, the prowess of the army, particularly our military genius, General Tongogara, who organized the People's War, which I described earlier on, using the experience of China. And of course, our intellectual, revolutionary intellectual, Chitepo, Herbert Chitepo, was the chairman of the party. And worked under Nyerere. He forged the relations with China. So we got the Chinese experience of how to run the modern warfare. So we then deployed our army in the northeast and embedded in the people for 2 years. When the war started, the Rhodesians couldn't know who was fighting them. So we no longer needed to retreat back to Mozambique. And we had also been held by Samora Machel, who had called us in because the Rhodesians had tried to cross into Mozambique to help the faltering Portuguese army. So the two armies, the Mozambicans, the two armies fighting against them. So they came to our side and said, guys, We got to come and join. We come and we teach you so that you pin your enemy down in Rhodesia. So that's how we ended up with an alliance with Frelimo. It was a fateful alliance. So we learned from the experience of Frelimo, which had advanced all the way from Tanzania to the Zambezi River, guerrilla warfare. So as they were crossing the Zambezi River, the Rhodesians said, no, we get to keep the African nationalists and their guerrillas on the other side of the river, because the river was the main barrier to overthrow Rhodesia. Because you can't, when you are crossing the river, it's a big river. It's fourth largest river of Africa, crocodiles and everything. So the deployment was difficult. But with the way Mozambique had advanced, we could now cross the river under the protection of Frelimo.
Right.
So we then deployed inside the country, embedded ourselves. Then when we started fighting, they couldn't find us. So that forced the Rhodesians to go to the negotiating table in Victoria Falls in 1974. And a byproduct of that was the freeing of our president. He was in jail, the current one. He was then freed because that was one of the demands of the guerrillas and the nationalists for the talks. So he went back to Zambia in 74, 75, went back to school to finish his school because he'd been studying 10 years and we finished university. He came back to war the second time after finishing his studies. So it's a lot of courage.
Absolutely.
You don't go to war twice, you escape once, because war is not a dinner party. So he comes back to war. And one of the things which he did was to start a professional intelligence training. Because on our side, we were much more political. But the other side, which was in our divided nationalist movement, the ZAP side, they had KGB training. And with a combination of some people who left the Rhodesian Security Service, our president now cobbled together an professional intelligence course. And she would be among the first recruits to be trained by our president. And because she was very smart, she ended up the director of his office. So she was moved from the camps to the headquarters in Maputo. Concurrently, myself, I was then sent to Yugoslavia for similar training, because Yugoslavia was East meets West at that particular time under Tito. Yeah. So it combined the best of the Western intelligence and the Russian intelligence. So I trained in Belgrade. Right. When I came back, I became part of the team because I was trained as a journalist in Zambia. After training as an intelligence officer, I trained under the Commonwealth Press Union in Zambia. I was deployed to Maputo. So every 8 o'clock in the evening, the whole sub-region would listen to our shortwave radio to follow the war. But also that was the way we were communicating with the people fighting on the ground inside the country. Absolutely. So my job was to deliver the news and the commentary and to do the reduction of the she would do the reduction of the military, the war communique from the high command, delivered it to her because her boss was now the advisor to the president Mugabe. So she would then use that war communique, and out of it, it was then given to us to bring out the news about how the fighters were winning the war at the front. So that was my job every day at 8 o'clock. So the whole sub-region would listen to that, and then, of course, further afield, able to follow the shortwave radio. So I became part of that team. So it was working when we were working together, she at headquarters and me at the department, that we finally we met and we became friends. And out of that, we then ended up as boyfriend, girlfriend. And we got married, and by 1978, late 78, that's when we got married under the rules and regulations of the party. Because, war is another life. Absolutely. It's not, life doesn't become static. To fight and to die is normal. Absolutely. That's how your life is at that time. So she couldn't go to the Lancaster House conference now because she was pregnant. And she remained in Maputo. Otherwise, she would have gone to that historic conference as the PA of our president, because was this legal advisor and special advisor to our former president Mugabe. So we remained in Maputo, and of course, the Lancaster House was victorious in terms of diplomacy, and our army then did something extraordinary, because the Western countries, they believe that those who fought for freedom. They don't like democracy. They were autocrats or they were dictators. So they said we must lay down the arms and go for an election. And they thought, they believed that we were coercing the people when we were teaching the people. So we went to the elections. They went blindly thinking that we were going to lose. But they overlooked that we had spent 5 years teaching the people, conscientizing them. So when eventually we know the results came, we had 90%, 97% of the vote. Their side had 3% of the vote. So this is a product of an army which flips the coin against the Western countries. They said they were champions of democracy and democracy elections. And they thought we were going to be bulleted to office. We said, no. We'll be balloted to office. So we laid our arms, gathered in assembly points, confident that our victory is now going to be consecrated by the people of Zimbabwe. Absolutely. And that's exactly what happened, to the glory of our nation, to the pride of Africa, and to the utter jubilation of our diaspora. You saw how the impact of it in the Caribbean, with Bob Marley paying all the way to Zimbabwe to come and do a concert at his own expense. To say, because this is the impact of Zimbabwe and our struggle for independence. So this is really the context in which we met. Our first son was born 8 days before independence. So he didn't need to run away from bombs as a baby, because the other children born in the war, they'd constantly be ducking and diving bombs, because the enemy was cruel, he was indiscriminate. And I want to say, war is not a dinner party, I repeat. Absolutely. Out of every 5 who went to war, only 2 came back alive. This is the price of that organizational capacity which Zimbabwe has today. It's a product of the blood and sacrifice of young people.